Okay, the warrior part came out of necessity.
Out of necessity.
But originally, if we're talking 1,000 years ago,
Right.
you would be hunters,
Hunters,
gatherers. Okay,
Right.
because our tribe was always keeper of the flint.
Mm-hmm.
So we made weapons and out of flint and arrows and knives and whatever.
Right.
We traded with everything for clothing, food, beads, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And we talk about the Great Warrior Trail that came down the mountains, and that was the Iroquois people coming from the north who came down into what is now Virginia and exchanged and bartered and also apparently found lives. That was part of the raiding parties that came down from the north. So that's a little bit of history about interaction.
Yep.
Okay. But from the barter era, we began to have encroachment. Unlike the people who lived near Jamestown, our first encounter, written documented encounter with colonists is stated to be around 1650. And people were not surprised, our Nottoway people were not surprised when they first encountered English coming into our territory. They actually came through looking to trade. That was part of the early English interaction with our tribe, was to find materials to send back to England. So, and that relationship lasted briefly because by 1677, we began to have to acquiesce and sign treaties, which mistakenly says is to protect you from encroachment, but unfortunately that was not
They'll
what
tell you
happened.
anything they have to. But the
Exactly.
original treaties look more like this in
That's it.
wampum,
In wampum.
in pictorial and verbal.
Exactly.
So as long as that tribe, we're not talking English now, but as long as the tribe held that wampum belt, no other Indian would dare cross the story that's on it. You know, if it said we're friends or we're traders or whatever, that was the law.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So this whole idea of treaties was very foreign, that you put your mark or whatever.
Right. And here's the mark of the Nottoway right here. It's the three rivers because we are bounded by three rivers. The Nottoway, the Meherrin, and the Blackwater. And then there's another river that converges from those three rivers called the Juwan. And it goes into further down into Nottoway, into Meherrin and Tuscarora territory, just further south.
Okay.
So that was symbolic right there, the signature. We gave tribute to the governor, and our tribute were the 3 arrows.
Okay.
So that was part of the treaty agreement, was that once a year we would turn and give 3 arrows to the governor.
And this pelt that we see up here,
Beaver,
Yep.
one of our barter items.
Right.
Okay, that was a good trade item. So
for hats.
for hats, beaver hats were a big thing in England. So
They're still very
very
expensive.
expensive. Yeah. So, but we were that time living on a smaller boundary, a 3-mile circle and a 4-mile square, and that was our reservation land here in Southampton County, Virginia.
And you're going to point to about where we are right now?
We are in right here, Capron.
So you're in the square area,
We're
or
in the
diamond
square.
area. Okay.
Exactly. The actual town was over along the river up in this area of the square through here. And then there was a great town in this area of the circle. The 3-mile circle was also part of the treaty because it was to surround the great town of the tribe.
Okay.
Okay, on the Assamusic Swamp. But that 4-mile square was also a garrison. It was to protect us against, it was a buffer zone. And it was not necessarily to protect the Nottoway, but it was to, part of an agreement with the English to be the buffer zone between the tribes to the south, namely the Tuscarora.
Yeah. Or the Cherokee too.
And the Cherokee. right.
Because Cherokee had big raiding parties at times.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So this was a part of our early history, and we're beginning to have that transition from the barter or trade era into being the buffer zone.
Now, how many years do you think transpired from the first time you saw the Europeans to where you are now, where you're on a reservation? Is that 5 decades?
I would say probably close to that.
And-
Now, we have to understand too that the Spanish actually did come into parts of North Carolina and no doubt probably came into this part of Virginia.
Mhm.
So having people from another area, from another country, from another continent would not have been necessarily a surprise, but we were an oral people. We passed things on by oral tradition.
Or pictorial.
So that part of our history is unknown. What we
Oh.
glean is from written records that happen to be English records that we have to reinterpret because they're given from an English perspective. We have to take them from our native perspective and give a different version.
Now, when you talk about the trade or the trade routes, the one thing that floored me is they went up to the very top tribe in Alaska below going towards the North Pole with the last existence and found Spanish soldiers' hats up there that were from South America that had been traded all the way along for whatever,
Right.
because they were just really unique.
Yeah.
But they found swords and helmets from South America up there in furthest part of the North Territories.
Right.
So the trade routes were so phenomenal back then. Anything you wanted, it's like today for FedEx or whatever.
FedEx and
Yeah,
Amazon.
and you would tell the traders what you wanted, and within a year or two, they'd
There
find
it
it and
is.
drag it to you. It'd cost you for
Right.
beaver pelts or spears or whatever.
Right. Right.
So you've gone that 50 years.
We've gone that 50 years. If you look at even the 1607 is like the point of English arrival. So by the time you get to 1677,
There you go.
you've gone those decades. And so we moved into this area of how do we continue to remain on our land, but also work with these new people who've come into the area and who have changed the way we do things. You have a clash of cultures. People who believe the land is owned, whereas we believe land was for everyone to use.
Yeah, it's your mother.
So, right. So, there are a lot of things going on, but the Nottoway figured out that they were overwhelmed, like all of the tribes, by weaponry that was much more superior to bows and arrows and spears.
Gunpowder.
So things were going to change, and how do you still remain in your space while change is going on? So you do things to continue to exist. Unfortunately, our early circle tract of land was the first area that was sold off. Okay, that started around 1735, and that area was sold off. And then the square tract, where we are now, began to be sold off, portions that were not used. All of the tribes in this area had trustees. They were Englishmen who were to assist. So there's a story there too about how land was lost. But we did have a small area of reservation not too far from here along the river near south of Cortland. And so that is where our folks still lived until, and continue, some people still live on that land. But in 1830, there was a request to the Virginia the Virginia General Assembly to have portions of our last reservation land allocated to descendants of females of the tribe. we are a matrilineal society.
I was going to say, I was going to have you define that because the Iroquois pretty much are all matriarch.
Right, so that was how you could define your lineage. And so after we got to that point, this is one of the earliest agreements. This one happens to show the land being sold. This was from the first transaction to sell land. And then this was our 1830 reservation. It's about 5,000 acres.
And can I get you to point to about where we are? This was the, where we are now on this.
We are further over here. This is kind of a
So
reversed.
that's going west of here?
We're here, yeah, this is on the west side.
But I'm saying all of this land is west of here or east of here?
It's east, but we are at the westernmost
And-
boundary.
okay.
Right.
And what year would you
This
say?
was 1830.
Okay.
Okay. And then allotment began here.
But
So-
they actually possessed the land enough to sell it, but that was for the trustees. Your husband was saying that the agreements they found only had one native on it, and the rest were all trustee signatures.
Exactly.
Yeah, like you had
Exactly.
one whistleblower, and the rest of them just did what they wanted.
Exactly. So, you know, it was not a fair process, but history can make you mad, but you have to let it go.
Well,
You
it's
know.
written by the victors, not the
The
victims.
victims, right. So, you know, you kind of understand. This was where they actually had to sue one of the trustees who was taking money.
Oh,
Okay, and they were paid. Okay, back then it was 1848, and it was $818. In 1848, that was a fortune.
yeah, a ton of
Okay,
money.
That was a fortune. And so we go to this area of, okay, remaining on the land, and we called it the time of to be who we are,
Mm-hmm.
and remain here. And so as individual landowners, people began to have their own farms,
Mm-hmm.
and were successful farmers. But then also along came the issue of race in Virginia, which is the Racial Integrity Act. We had census takers. This is 1870. It still listed our people as Indian, IND. But after that, people were either blended into two different racial designations. So,
And being Indian is at that time period is about like being black. And in fact, there was a lot of things you couldn't do. You couldn't buy alcohol, you couldn't buy gunpowder, you couldn't buy cocaine.
right. All of it was, there were restrictions. There were restrictions, and that's how people became either designated as black or white.
Right.
And so that identity, it wasn't until 1967 that that racial identity was corrected here in Virginia.
Huh.
And people of Native ancestry could have their birth certificates
You went back to being Indian?
Right.
Okay, now you're in the period now of the Indian Removal Act.
Right.
How did
so
you survive Oklahoma,
by taking allotments and becoming individual landowners.
but not Indians? Or
As still remaining as Indians, Indians who owned land. But you think about Indian removal, people were pushed off their land. Our people said, well, I want to be an individual landowner. So they took an allotment of land, became an individual landowner. It's
Wow.
no longer reservation. It's an individual farm.
oh man,
So it was old reservation land, but it is now an individual farm.
I've run into a tribe in Louisiana that they were very prosperous plantation owners of cotton, tobacco, whatever.
Right,
But huge plantations, filthy rich plantations.
right.
And when the Indian Removal Act came along, they all got together in one council one night and said, okay, as of this point right now, there are no Indians in southern Louisiana. We're all just white people,
Right.
maybe a little bit mixed black, that's why we're
Right.
darker.
Right.
And they were never removed. and but I can't get them to interview today.
Today.
But anyway, I didn't.
Well, that was a way, you figure out ways to protect yourself.
Well, yes, it's like drowning the babies down in the Everglades
Right.
to keep from having to suffer death to all of the people in Oklahoma.
Right.
So today, oh, I'm sorry, are we today yet?
Yeah,
We two
we're
today?
here today, and this
Okay.
kind of shows all of the activities of the tribe. I mean, we have people who do a lot of things, and we did a collage kind of Nottoway in the 21st century, some of the things that we do.
And your traditional dress?
Right.
Okay. This guy here, I got two cousins that he could take their license and be mistaken for, I swear. And where they're rafting, is that local?
No, that's not. That's my
Okay,
son.
that's just
and
part of the
I think
entertainment.
he was in Nevada. Yeah. So we have a variety of people who do many things, from pharmacists to research chemists to accountants, environmentalists, farmers. This lady works at the Smithsonian, teachers,
So
so.
this is part of my scope, is to show the people we're not just savages sitting around a campfire waiting to attack your wagons in a circle. I have one daughter that's a research scientist, and she's a DNA expert. The other
Okay.
one is a Microsoft expert,
Right,
develops defense systems for the country.
right.
My son's an electronic diesel mechanic. We're not just all...
Sitting at home.
Yeah,
making
I'm worried about
baskets.
how much gas I've got left in the tank, so I don't know where they got their brains from. It couldn't have been me. We're going to pause for a second here.